Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual Pérez Art Museum Miami. My name is Marie Vickles and I'm the Director of Education, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's program, Black Diasporic Feminism, Intersectionality, and Solidarity in the Age of Protest. I would also like to acknowledge at this moment the multitude of Black women that have come before us and made this moment possible. This is an amazing panel of powerful, creative women who, as you will come to see, have some very wonderful and strong thoughts on what we're going to talk about today. And some of these women that I would like to acknowledge and say the names of those we know, and also acknowledge those that we don't know their names. Ida B. Wells, Shirley Chisholm, Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, the Combahee River Collective, Kimberly Crenshaw, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Mickey Kendall, and Legacy Russell, just to name a few. So our mission at PAMM is to encourage everyone to see art as an incentive for genuine human interaction, communication, and exchange. I sincerely hope that all of you joining us today in this digital space are doing well, taking care of yourselves, your loved ones, and that our program provides a moment of reflection and inspiration during the course of your day. A few other acknowledgements before we get started. I'd like to thank the incredible team of people working so very hard to make our education programs come together, both at the museum and online. I'd like to acknowledge Anita Bram, Associate Director of Adult Programs and Audience Engagement, who will be joining us during the Q&A portion, and our world-class AV team, Denise Faxis and Andrew Bird. Thank you all. We couldn't do this without you. Okay, now let's get started with introductions of our featured speakers. Genevieve Gaynard is a Los Angeles-based artist whose work focuses on installation, sculpture, and photographic self-portraiture to explore race, femininity, and class. As a biracial woman in America, Gaynard investigates the aesthetic and cultural divide between Black and white, a chasm as palpable as it is invisible. She interrogates notions of passing by positioning her own female body as the chief site of exploration, challenging viewers to navigate the powers and anxieties of intersectional identity. Naudline Pierre lives and works in Brooklyn. She creates work that explores a mysterious alternate universe full of characters that often interact with each other in tender ways. Pierre holds an MFA from the New York Academy of Art and a BFA from Andrews University. Pierre was a 2019-2020 artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York. The works produced at that residency will be on view at MoMA PS1 from December 2020 through March 2021. Debra Roberts is a mixed media artist whose work challenges the notion of ideal beauty. Her work has been exhibited internationally across the USA and Europe. She was selected to participate in the Robert Rauschenberg Residency 2019 and is a recipient of the Anonymous Was a Woman grant in 2018, the Paula Krasner Foundation grant in 2016, and the Ginsberg Klaus Award Fellowship 2014. Roberts received her MFA from Syracuse University, New York. She lives and works in Austin, Texas. She has a solo exhibition opening this fall at the Contemporary Austin in Austin, Texas. María Elena Ortiz is a curator at PAMM, where she is spearheading the Caribbean Cultural Institute, CCI. At PAMM, Ortiz has organized several projects, including The Other Side of Now, Foresight in Contemporary Caribbean Art, Latinx Art Sessions, and Firelei Baez Bloodlines. Ortiz has contributed to writing platforms such as the Davidoff Art Initiative, Terremoto Magazine, and others. A recipient of the Colección Patricia Phelps de Cisneros and Independent Curators International, ICI Travel Award for Central America and the Caribbean, Ortiz's curatorial practice is informed by the connections between Latinx, Latin American, and Black communities in the US and the Caribbean. So during the course of this afternoon's conversation, please post your questions in the Q&A of our Zoom webinar. If you're not actually accessing this program through the Zoom webinar, I encourage you to do so. It's still open to register. You can find the link on our website at www.pamm.org, or we have pinned messages to our Facebook Live. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Genevieve, Naudline, Debra, and María Elena.
Thank you, Marie.
Welcome, 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 everyone. Okay, let's see here. The Zoom world. Is everyone on the screen? Okay, awesome. I always feel like I got this and then sometimes I don't. All right, so thank you all so much for being here with us today, sharing this space and this next hour of your lives with us. We have so much we can talk about, and I know it's been kind of challenging, at least for me, to like narrow down what we could get into, but let's start with the obvious. The reason we're all here is because of this amazing exhibition, Allied with Power, María Elena, that you have put together at the museum. An amazing way for us to get back into IRL or in real life, you know, activations and activities, but also still doing virtual program like we're doing right now. So I think it'd be great to share with our viewers a little bit about the exhibition, and if you can talk about the selection of works, also a placement perhaps, if that plays a role, by women within Allied with Power, and how your experiences as a Black woman, a Latinx woman, influence your own curatorial practice.
Well, thank you, Marie. You know, this exhibition, Allied with Power, is a show that actually, you know, started with a collection. So Jorge Pérez, you know, he's been really investing in African contemporary art and African diaspora art. And that includes, you know, Afro-European artists, African Americans, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Caribbean. And he's, you know, like his collection right now has like probably over 400 works, and, you know, it's probably more than that. And I had a very special opportunity because, you know, as a Black woman, Latin woman as well, I thought this as a great moment to start thinking about and doing something that we don't see often, but we need more of, which is like how to start thinking about all these different histories that allude to the diversity of the Black experience in one place. You know, we often don't get a chance to see, you know, artists who are Black or are allies to this experience, really starting to compare and share notes, you know, and thinking about, wait a minute, you know, there was a segregation system, or there still is in the US. There was another one in South Africa with apartheid. Like there's another thing happening in Latin America. How can we start sharing experiences? So, and really think about all of us as allied to one another and what that means, right? Because we all have very different cultures, nationalities, languages, yet we share an experience that we can find connections among each other. So of all the works that are in this collection, I ended up selecting 39 works, of which that amasses to 37 artists. And, you know, I think that often I work very intuitively. Like I wasn't necessarily like choosing from a particular area or gender or what, or you know, or those specifics. But the reality is that it's of the 37 artists, 16 are women, which is about like 46% or so, which, you know, and I actually just did the math for this presentation. I was like, well, let me see how many are women. I was, oh, actually, that's not a bad number. It could be better. But I think that, you know, which is why, as an aside, I think it's important to have more people like us in different positions, right? Because I think that intuitively we can do those types of conversations. So the works of the women that are in the show, actually, this is the beginning of the exhibition. What you're seeing here, which right straight at you, is Carol Walker, then Pierre which is here, and Deborah as well, Pierre to the right side, and Debra Roberts to my left. And this was a very conscious decision. I did want to start with women in the show because not only were the works amazing, and I think, you know, this Carol Walker here reads very much as a history painting for me, and really speaks about just, you know, the complexities of African American history. But then Pierre and Roberts' works, in scale, they might look small, but they're also very powerful. You know, I mean, we have Roberts and Pierre here, so I won't go into the details, but, you know, Roberts looking into childhood of Black children, Black girls, and then Pierre alluding to the spirituality, which I think that for a lot of us, I know for me, we use it as a tool for resilience and perseverance. To me, those were really important themes to which to start the exhibition. the women in the show, they're very diverse. Like, so we have, just to name a few, we have Sanae Moholi, which is an artist from South Africa that deals with LGBTQ plus issues, as well as female portraiture and ideas of pigmentocracy. Alongside with the history of apartheid. We have an older woman, Sue Williamson, who is also one of the best known South African artists. And then we have María Magdalena Campos Pons, an Afro-Cuban, and Firile Baez, Porta Saavedra, and I won't go down the list. Sherry Samba, which is like another like beautiful African artist. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of nationality, but also mediums and perspectives.
Wonderful, thank you. And I do want to point out, you reminded me of something. I do want to point out, so when we're talking about women's experiences for the sake of this conversation and our audience that is with us, we are talking about women with an X, women as it includes everyone that identifies as a female, as a woman. So it is a very encompassing and intersectional definition that we are aiming for. So just wanted to put that out there and hopefully come back to that throughout the conversations that we continue on. So artists, yes, let's get into this. So this is a question for all of the artists. We'll go kind of in rounds. Each person will address it, and we have some beautiful imagery to accompany it while you're speaking. So the question is this. When we had a moment last week, we connected about this in a separate conversation. And Genevieve, you brought up something really important that struck me like afterwards. I was like, oh my God, she's so right. You talked about the importance of materials being your language as artists. And that is, that's where you live. That's your space. I'm like, yes, duh, that's absolutely right. So can each of you talk about the materiality of your work and what you would like to communicate with the viewers of your work? And we're going to start off with Deborah.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, well, I want people, I talked about this before, when I started to couch my argument about identity and femininity, and I started to use a lot of young girls, it was really talking about this idea of gaining power and how do we gain that power very early on. And for me, it was making choices at a young age. And so I thought that was important because that started leading the way I entered the world. And so in this work in particular, I have this little girl is saying that I can do this peacefully, or I can do this, very angrily. So she has a hand to the face, and then she has the peace signs up, which I love. And then those hands that are coming out of her are the history of all the people who have will support her as she goes on, and the ancestors who have supported her. So it's very important in my practice to show that power and the strength, also the vulnerability of young women very early on, and to celebrate that too, as well as the strength. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Mm-hmm. I think we have maybe one more image. So these works are currently in the exhibition Allied with Power. They were in that installation shot that we showed earlier in the same room with Naudline's work.
Right.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
And
so
yeah.
Do you want me to talk about each work, or do you just like?
If you would like, that'd be beautiful. Yes.
Right. Well, this is the first work that I did where I crossed the arms over, and because I think we are pulled in so many different directions as women and trying to find the right direction to walk in. And so I have this is also where I had stomach. I never showed body parts of the little girls, but this is the first one I kind of showed a little belly. So I wanted people to see that she was young, she was still defining herself and her direction, but yet she was pulled in this idea of what Blackness is and what Black femininity is, and she just wanted to, actually it was tying her up. She wasn't free to be her own self. So I love this piece. Yeah, this was done in 2018, and it's just perfect. The face, everything went together. And
I wanted to say that I really appreciate like your use of fragments. You know, when you use
Right.
collage, it's like from a very early on, we as women, we're very fragmented, we're very multidimensional. So that's something that you know, I really appreciate of your practice.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Deborah.
No problem.
Okay, so let's see. And moving now on to Genevieve. Thinking about this question again, you know, like the importance of materials and how you use those materials to communicate.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my practice involves several mediums. And this is a photograph for the show. This particular image was shot in New Orleans, where my dad's side of the family is from. So it was like a really cool experience to kind of explore the history there. And at the time, a lot of the Confederate statues were being pulled down. So there were all these empty bases. So it seemed like a really important opportunity to kind of elevate these spaces that once were negative symbols into like a more positive symbol. So yeah, and so just kind of pushing myself to take on different characters, and in this one it was even a little more complicated because I'm appearing in one image twice.
I was wondering about that a lot. I know it's technical, but how do you do that?
Yeah, so the camera is set up on a tripod, and so basically the frame doesn't move. I just move. The only tricky thing is weather. So in New Orleans, which I think is kind of similar to Miami in terms of like the weather kind of shifting pretty quickly. And so I actually had to shoot this image like 2 different days because the first time I attempted it, like the images were too different from each other because there's like a 20-minute time span between me changing into the other costume and then kind of coming back and having it line up. But yeah, so I went back on a day that the weather was cooperating, and essentially those 2 frames get overlaid in Photoshop, and then you just kind of remove to reveal the person, the second figure in the image.
Amazing. It's so powerful. It actually, the setting reminds me of a park in Miami. I know it's not Miami, but every time I see it, I'm like, is that Collins Park?
but the themes of the picture kind of alludes to can be Miami. I mean, it's all over the United States, you know, how to grapple with these sites that have these monuments that allude to a very controversial history, which is what I really like about this image. Like I always think about, and the first time I went to, like, some of you probably been to the Berlin Museum and how they have all the Nazi memorabilia there. And it's quite, you know, it takes you because you don't want to forget that this history is alive and present, you know? So I think that the work also, for me at least, makes me question what to do with this history. Where does it belong? Do we want to forget it? Like, do we want to remind ourselves, hey, you know, and also what do we want to replace it with? Which in this case, you know, Genevieve proposed a really good, you know, idea in terms of what to replace it with.
Absolutely.
I kind of make a point to, you know, use things from the past to kind of raise or address the fact that we haven't come as far as we'd like to think. So usually I'm kind of dialing that in more with my installations or my collage work, but for this photograph, it's definitely doing that as well.
Now, this particular work was shot in, or maybe it wasn't shot, it was, the date on it is 2017. So this is before the year of protest, 2020. How does it feel now to look back on these works before we were like dumping, you know, statues in the bays all over our country?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of shows the relevancy of the conversation that a lot of us are having. And, you know, as things are kind of elevating around these topics now, it just shows that, you know, there's a lot of us that have kind of been under the radar addressing this the whole time, you know? So it's nice that more folks are kind of catching up, but there's so much work to do that it's, you know, we've kind of just been chipping away at it.
Right. No pun intended. Okay. So, Naudline, so also for you, the same question is posed. You know, materiality, your work, the message you would like to communicate through that work.
Yeah, I love the idea of creating my own language. Of course, it's built on a very long history of sort of figurative work and oil painting, and thinking a lot about who's in the canon, who's left out. And I think that's a base to approach the work from. But ultimately, the work is about power in the fact that I'm establishing an imaginary world with imaginary figures and an alter ego that engage in acts of protection and exploration. And I think the power to make my own rules about where the light is coming from and the background, the middle ground, the foreground, texture, all of that creates this sense of power for me that I think is in the work. And so I'm grabbing from elements of my identity, which is multifaceted, and creating images, creating this language, using a very old medium, but sort of remixing it for my own use. And I think that's what's most exciting for me in making the work is I get to decide how these femme figures are interacting with each other and how they're experiencing gender and love and pain and terror and malice, but also tenderness. And I think the power that's within me gets to get sort of create, just it comes out in a visual language. So yeah.
Beautiful, well said. Wow, yeah, the work is it's so powerful in person. You still, and I speak for myself when I say this, I still feel that energy from it, even through a screen. But when I finally had a chance to go to the museum here in Miami and see it for the first time, we finally opened up on November 5th. I was really just blown away by, you know, just that visceral kind of emotion it brings up. It's lovely. I don't know, María Elena, anything you want to add? Any little tidbit you want to add to that we might not know as a curator?
Well, I'll say this, like, as a curator is a little bit easier when you have so many good works to have in a show. I think that for me, you know, if you go to a show, you're gonna see that I really like color. And that was something that I walked in the gallery and said, oh my God, I really like colors, but I don't want this to look like, you know, carnival. Not because it's a bad thing, but because, you know, the works are very, no, but the works are very, they have a loaded histories here. So I also wanted to make sure that people would be willing to accept it, you know, instead of feeling, you know, like in a confrontational type of thing. I wanted to be able to engage in a dialogue because, you know, 2020 and in the last, you know, couple of decade or so, it's been a very polarized environment. So, and we are a museum, we're like a space for dialogue. So I also wanted to make sure that the sensibility that artists were putting forward was appreciated in a way that was humble and also open. So for me, a challenge was to make sure to kind of create space, which I think that I hear that often when you go into the show, that the show is very beautiful, but yet very spacey. And it allows for people to kind of encounter the works, you know, in as a singularity, but also as a whole. In terms of what Naudline just said, you know, it's funny about, you know, here we often think a lot about reason and logic as a way to make decisions, but often we actually make decisions based on emotion, which is something that I really appreciate about her work, that touching on that, the spiritual, the emotional, because it's really, you know, when you see the images of on TV of like, you know, I can't breathe, that really, it's really touching our emotions, you know, not even the logic of that comes afterwards, but it's really, you feel the pain and you feel just a sense of loss. That's when we react and we go to the street or wherever we decide to go, how we decide to release that. So, and I think that, you know, we are in a moment in which we question often like facts and so on, but I think we should also accept the fact that emotions really also inform the way we encounter the world. Yeah.
Indeed. True, true. Yeah, it's not all here. It's a lot here too in the heart. So this last question that will lead to many other questions is kind of what we kicked off our discussion with last week when we were talking about what we're going to talk about. So we're like, what does a Black feminist look like in 2020? And actually I had further conversations with one of my really good friends and colleagues, which is a rare combination, right? To have someone that's just a solid person in so many ways to you. Lonnie Johnson, she's a local artist here in Miami. And we're talking about what does a Black feminist look like in 2020 in this age of protest? And how are we as women, you know, in this space, this amazing panel, like, I'm just so happy to see all of our faces here on the screen together having this conversation as part of like an international flagship museum exhibition in an internationally known city during Miami Art Week. Like, that's pretty epic, right?
Right.
So thinking about those things, like, my question to you is this: how do each of you define and practice feminism based on your own lived experiences as Black women, whatever that means to you? You know, because I know we had a lot of resistance about like labels. It's like, I don't, you know, like, what does it mean to be a feminist? So thinking about that, how do each of you define and practice feminism within your own lives as Black women, standing on the shoulders of so many Black women that have come before us and laid foundations for us, whether we know it or not? And if you don't mind, you can always pass, but we can start from the back to the front now. We ended with Naudline. Naudline, if you want to start first.
Sure, I can start. Like we talked about in our pre conversation, I find that it's hard to define anything for a large group of people, but I can, you know, speak for myself. And I think for me, my feminism looks like doing what I want to do when I want to do it, but also seeking intensely seeking safety, protection, joy, love, and really allowing myself to experience those things. And also thinking a lot about future for me and also for those coming after me and those coming along with me. So I think it can look different for different people, but for me, that's what it is.
Nice, thank you. Okay, and if I remember the order, Genevieve.
Middle. I've been kind of playing over like this question in my head, and I was taking notes, and the first thing I wrote down was limitless. And I feel like that just kind of just keeps it open. It keeps it welcoming, because I think, you know, it's just expanding, and I have to like remind myself and remind myself that it's limitless, but also I liked what Naudline said, like remembering to like take others along with you on this journey, and just, you know, honoring those before us. And it's exciting to think that we could be some of those women that folks look back as part of the history. And I think another thing I'll just say again from our pre-talk was, you know, so often people are trying to put us in boxes. So if you kind of picture the box having all of these doors and they swing both ways, so you can kind of enter that realm of, you know, Black feminism and beyond, like, you know,
Most
not limited.
definitely. Freedom, limitless. Deborah, drop some wisdom on us.
Drop some wisdom, okay? Well, you know, I would say for me, and I'm just talking about myself at this point, is that financial freedom, to be able to do what you want when you want, and to not have people dictate your direction, what to do with your body, what to do with your language, what to do, how you enter the room. That type of financial freedom, that type of power that we should all want, those are things that I think is the core to feminism. It's not being defined, being any type of woman you want, any type of woman, allowing your daughter to be whatever type of woman she wants, not defined by any labels, but entering the world with power and strength and understanding who you are and having a voice. So for me, it starts with financial freedom. So, and deciding your own fate and not let it be dictated by others. So when I think of that, and I did think of my practice, that's what I'm trying to do with the young girls. I'm trying, and also with some of the males too, is to allow people to see the power and the strength that's within them and not defined by history or someone else's idea who they are. So, and I think that that type of freedom and power comes with financial power. And I think that's something we all should be talking about, actually.
Thank you. So true. And it's maybe not something it's not the go-to, right? I think especially in like the creative world, we're not like, oh yeah, what does my bank account look like? But that's real.
Right. But you know, you can do that with your practice. I mean, you can decide with your practice, how am I going to be successful with this? How am I going to move forward? Am I going to let someone work me to death? And I still, at the end of the day, don't have the things that I need to perform and be successful. So, and you know, we all know women are treated differently in the art world, and sometimes expressing the ideas of, you know, that doesn't work for me, and you know, things like that. Then you get labeled as difficult and things like that. But I think it's very important to not only, you know, do this amazing work, but to have a voice too. And not only, you know, like I said, if they don't have a seat at the table, bring your own chair. You know, you don't have to, you know, allow people to tell you it's one way or no way. So, you know, that's what I'm striving for, you know, I don't know.
Yes. Yes. Having a plan, crucial, right?
Right, like, absolutely.
Powerful, powerful. I'm taking notes from that one. I'm like, what am I doing in my life? Okay, I'm gonna get it together. María Elena, can you share with us some wisdom as well? What does a Black feminist look like in 2020? And how do you define it for yourself?
Well, I agree with all of this wonderful comments. I think that for me, I mean, a few words came to mind, one being sisterhood and the one being action. I do think that the struggle now that we have is that we need to really fight against the symbolic representation of having women in certain roles versus the actual change. And what I mean by that is that, sure, we can have a seat at the table, but what about the wage gap, you know, which is what you're mentioning, Deborah, or also reproductive rights, another big one. You know, there's a lot of things that we, sometimes we settle for just, which is something that now, you know, now we're gonna have the vice president elected a woman, and which is great, but I just hope that that also helps all of us. You know, it's not just the symbolic, you know, Margaret Thatcher was in power for a long time, and she's known for not giving opportunities to women. So like, I do think that it's very important for us to really strive for that balance between the symbolic gesture and the actual, and what equality really means for us. And I think sisterhood is a really, for me, I feel like that's the tool to do it. And I mean, like, you know, across races, cultures and whatnot, I think we as women should meet more often and talk about the realities and the differences that we face, and really create solidarity among each other. Because men do that, you know, they have the brotherhood, which is, you know, we don't think about that often because we've just been a culture to do that, but men support each other, they do. And I see it often, you know, in work spaces. And it's quite interesting. They support each other even beyond gender or sexuality. At least that's been my experience. And another thing that I want to say that is now escaping my mind about sisterhood, and in my practice, is that I do have colleagues, like female artists or other female curators that I speak to, like when I have questions about how to maneuver situations, or just want to you know, kind of release what I'm feeling. And if I need to ask myself, you know, like Deborah was saying, you know, setting your boundaries and your limits. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's something that, you know, sometimes you get encouragement from other females. So to me, that's what it means to, which is difficult. But yeah, that'll be my answer.
There's so many ways. Thank you, María Elena. That's beautiful. Sisterhood is crucial. It's solidarity, you know, with a very specific kind of perspective on it, which I think is actually also connected to what we call intersectionality, right? It's like we are connected across various issues, and by connecting those issues in a common cause, we can in essence change the path of what it means to be a woman, a Black woman, a Black feminist, however we choose to define or not define ourselves. Let's see, we're almost time for questions. A lot of this work, I just wanted to say, is not only something that is within like our professional lives, but I think it starts on a personal level, right? It's, if we want better for the world, then by deduction, we potentially want better for ourselves too, and those around us, those we love. And I'm wondering how, and this is for anyone that feels like they really want to answer this, it could be everyone, but what are some practices within your own life that you do on a personal level to really work on being this equitable being? You know, how do you in a daily way think about like your interactions with other people, whether it's, you know, within your family or like folks on the block or whoever it is, because the way we treat each other in our smaller circles and bigger circles is the way that we treat the world, right? And I think a lot of what we see right now is like, if there's that phrase, I mean, I have to go there. It's like, how are you going to win if you're not right within? It starts there. So what is some of the personal work that you do to make sure that you are right within in order to share and do more and truly live a life that is seeking like sisterhood and solidarity and freedom and all these beautiful things we talked about? Whoever wants to dive into that pool.
I'm gonna say my little part so I can listen. But you know, like all my assistants are women, they all have MFAs, they're all artists, different genres. And you know, we work as a team to make Debra Roberts better. And not only that, there's the camaraderie we have, the podcast, we listen, we talk to each other. We, you know, how can I do this? You know, things like that. So we're all building, even though they're helping me, we're building all of our practices just by the language and the dialogue that we do when we stop and have lunch and just talk back and forth. You know, I have an idea, and there's a safety in that you can talk about it, and the freedom. So I think, I mean, we don't have it as much as we did before, you know, COVID is now, so we don't really get a chance to sit down and talk. But it was like very important for us. And that's what I wanted out of my studio practice, to talk about issues that surrounded us, whether they were art related or not, and how did that interact with your practice. So that's how I do it on a daily basis. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Anyone else interested to take that on a little bit?
I guess I'll chime in and just say that I'm fortunate enough to have both Deborah and Naudline as friends that I can like reach out to and, you know, check in on. I was talking to both of them like right before this, making sure like, you know, these things are nerve-wracking sometimes, and just, you know, we got this. And just whether it's just checking in because we're all kind of in our bubbles right now, we don't have that, you know, community that we once had in terms of just like showing up for each other in that way. It just doesn't take much to share your experiences with a friend, with a fellow artist, and just share the knowledge that you've experienced and be open to hearing their experiences as well, just because that's really how we can kind of grow and learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. To piggyback on that, I have to say that like thinking about the way that I interact with the women in my world, really trying to be supportive and also like provide information and be vulnerable with each other, because I think that there's value in allowing people in letting them know when you're struggling, in reaching out for help, but also, you know, being open about mistakes so that others don't have to make the same mistakes. I think for me, it's about aligning myself with people who sort of like want the same things in terms of how they want the world to look like. So yeah, I think it starts within, but then you kind of radiate out to the people that you're interacting with. And then hopefully that radiates out to people that maybe you don't have close relationships with, but you can sort of build structures that can help more than the people within your core circle.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, I have, you know, networks of colleagues that I speak to, you know, for support and guidance from different ages. I also, you know, as I get older, I also get younger curators approach me and ask me about, you know, I want to go into the museum world. What do you think? And I try to be honest, empathetic, but also always leave my door open, because I think that that's also very important, you know, to kind of make sure that I know that I need to, you know, leave the door open and leave a place for someone else to be in that place. I think that, yeah, like for me, it's also knowing that time will continue to pass, and others, I should let others also have their voice and create space for those voices. But
Beautiful.
empathy is empathy. And
Yes.
when in doubt, be empathetic.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's this idea of assuming the best, assuming best intent when you can, right? Instead of assuming the worst, it's like find that empathy. Think about what is the best possible scenario in any given situation, right? Easier said than done, but hey, 2020 is almost over, so we've learned a lot, but let's keep going. All right, so now it is time for us to go to the Q&A portion of our session. We have, many participants watching, and some questions perhaps have been posted or will start to be posted. I'd like to welcome Anita Bram to the chat, to the Zoom. Welcome, Anita.
Thanks so much. And seriously, congratulations on this conversation. It's been a pleasure to enjoy from here. Okay, so we're gonna go straight into the first question. Thank you so much, Misia Anderson, for kicking us off, warming us up. She says, or she or he, apologies, says, thank you for all your words and your amazing works. Thinking with Marie Genevieve's call about materiality, my question relates to the materiality of place in our lives. So 1, what does your practice of Black feminism mean in relation to place? And 2, place as in where we're all sitting during this call, but also considering what it means for this exhibition to take place in Miami. We could start with just the first part.
let's see. I don't know, María Elena, do you want to?
Sure. I will address part of this.
Okay.
I won't talk about I think the first one is related most to artists. But I'll say something about feminism, and I think a lot of us here in this group also know, feminism has a very contested history, because initially it did not, it wasn't for every woman, especially not all of us in this chat room. So I think that this idea of Black feminism is very, there's a lot to unpack there, but we don't have to I won't go into that now. But what I will say is that, Miami, it's funny. So a few things. This show was actually supposed to happen in April, and just to let you know, like the type of work that we do at PAMM, because this is all like a team effort. When COVID happened, we actually ended up moving the show to this time. So this was March. We didn't know what was going to happen in the summer of 2020, but we knew that the themes and the topics that the show are addressing were very relevant, and that was not going to go away. Now, Miami, as some of you know, it's a very complex space. It's a minority majority city. There's a lot of tension within what that implies. And within the Black community, it's a very diverse one that is divided by national boundaries. Like I'm Afro. Somebody can say I'm Afro-Cuban, I'm Afro-Puerto Rican, I'm Afro this, Afro that. But what I like about Miami a lot, in compared to other U.S. cities, is exactly that. Is the fact that you see the Haitian American experience, you see the Afro-Latino experience, and you see the African American experience all together colliding in a city in the South, because let's not forget that Miami Beach was segregated until not that long ago. So I think it is important. And also the fact that Miami is, kind of the gateway, almost looking to Africa, the continent. So, and its regional location as the middle of all these different places, Europe and so on. So I do think that in Miami, it's important for us to think about the themes in the show because of our location, and also because who our demographic is. And because of our demographic, we are able to speak about those topics better than anybody else, I believe, in the US. So I think that's my answer to the second question. So now I leave it to the artists. Pass the baton.
Can you restate the first part of that question? Sorry.
Sure. It is, what does your practice of Black feminism mean in relation to place?
And I want to say, both Deborah and Genevieve, you guys spend time in Miami, as you guys
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
might have perspective on that.
Well, I think for me, Genevieve, I'm just going to jump in real quick, and then you can, we're not going to talk about Miami, but the show, but how does Black feminism relate to a place, in my practice? Well, I live in Austin, Texas, and we have, I think, 3% African-American people here. So there's a lot of, white people. So how do you create works that you're trying to define who you are in a place where you are the minority? I mean, you're lesser than the minority because the percentage is so low. Is that you have to do a lot of research, you have to do a lot of travel, you have to, have dialogue with other people to create some type of language that you can share with others. Genevieve is right, having talked with her and other artists and about what I'm trying to say in the work is so very important. So sometimes place may not be in your physical place. It may be in more of a spiritual realm where you're actually talking with other people and deciding how you're gonna push your work forward in your practice. And so for me, it's very important that I travel out of Austin, even though during COVID, it's been extremely hard to do that, but it's really important to get other views and world views. If you're trying to make a wider statement about your work, a more broader explanation about how being a woman has changed so very much since you were a little kid, things like that. So I hope I answered that question. I don't know. I probably didn't. At least I talked.
You did.
When I think about place, especially in the work that I'm making, I think of a sort of like non-space, and the creation of a place that, like Deborah was saying, that's more of a spiritual place. So I think about place, I think about power, I think about creating that space to expand, explore, and to stand in the complexity of my identity that isn't always available, I think, in this physical plane. So creating these portals, these other universes, you say place, and I just think about, where can I find that place? How can I make that place? And I make it on the picture plane, on the canvas, with the materials that I have.
I don't want to cut you all off, but we can move on to another question if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay, from GC in the chat. In addition to the protest movements throughout the country / world, the museum world has also seen an upheaval as artists, staff, and the public protest trustee identity and institutional policies. How would you want to re-envision the role museums play in our communities and society? Great question.
I would love to answer that a little bit, but also hear from everyone else.
You should answer, Marie. You
Yeah.
haven't answered our question.
I'm like, I like that one. Re-envisioning the roles museums play in our communities. I think we really have, as the person that works in museums, we have an amazing moment right now. It's, and the moment has always been there, but now the fire is like pushing it forward to truly embrace what it means to be community-centered, to think about equity in a way that is infused throughout our whole institution, from the way that we receive funding to the way that our museum runs, in all aspects of what it means to be a museum. And every museum is different. We're a contemporary art museum, so we don't have the issues of like historical collections that need to be given back. So that in one way we're kind of getting off easy in that area, but we have other issues, like just thinking about what is a museum for the community? How can it truly be of the community, for the community, and the plurality of what community means? Just like we talked about with what it means to be a feminist, a Black feminist, a Black woman, et cetera, et cetera. Community has many peoples are represented within what it means to be community. And museums, independently run, private, nonprofit, et cetera, really have, this is a moment of reckoning and thinking about how they can concretely put changes forward within their institutions, start those wheels of change, because sometimes things take a long time, but if it is a priority, it will be done. So what does that mean in like some concrete ways? I think thinking about access to a museum, how are people able to access your space? Can they get in for free? Can they not? Are there other ways for them to get in? Who has a say in how a museum is programmed? How does that process work? Transparency around how museums operate, both programmatically and financially. And also on the philanthropic side, what does giving to a museum entitle someone to? Thinking about those things. Are you giving freely? Are there strings attached? Like all of those things need to be thought about, really looked at, and consider like, how are these things being worked on with the goal of a truly equitable space that is for all. That's it. I'll step off my soapbox. I'd love to hear other opinion on that too, or if we have other questions.
We do. Anybody else want to answer that one before we?
Well, I'll make a quick comment. I think that, when museums started like at this scale over 100 years ago, they were they had this role, especially in the US, as a space for education, like a place that you teach people what, art is, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that I feel, and this is a very personal opinion, that even that should be challenged a little bit, because I think that that works very seamless if you have a very cohesive idea of what our nation is. But in the moment that we're right now, where there's so much diversity, right, and a lot of difference, I do think that there's gotta be a moment of self-reflection from the other side as well, if you kind of follow what I'm saying. Like, not only the museum, you know, teaching, quote unquote, somebody, but also the audience teaching us, and the museum being more flexible and more reacting to what's happening, versus this very kind of almost very patriarchal approach towards audiences and the masses. So that's something that I personally feel like should be reconsidered. And I also think that, you know, we're very lucky in the cities. And I think that a lot of the challenges with our institutions are actually like more in, you know, non-urban spaces. That's where a lot of work should be done. So I do wonder how can museums and art spaces can thrive in those areas of the country. Yeah. And yeah.
Thank you.
I have something to add, actually, that may be a little bit controversial, but I think museums should just be free across the board. I think people from everywhere should be able to access things. And I know many museums are free or have sort of different situations for different financial situations, but I think museums should be free. And that's that.
Thank you. I agree. I'm just gonna go straight to this question because I feel like it's juicy. It could be one last final juicy question before we sign off. It's from George Fishman. What are the signs you see that the prominence of Black and female artists and curators have gained recently will remain in the months and years ahead? Do you feel you are consolidating your power in the face of how culture sometimes anoints flavors of the month?
I mean, I personally think that nobody's gonna give you power. Nobody's gonna give you power. You're always gonna have to fight for it. So no, I think that it's always gonna be a struggle. I think it's always gonna be, you know, and the last 8 years are a great example of that. So we cannot take anything for granted. We cannot take anything for granted. You are in one day, another day you're out. So I think that it's always, in my opinion, it's always gonna be, we're always gonna have to be, you know, challenging, just the way our ancestors did, right? All these women that Marie mentioned at the beginning, they never took a nap to say, oh, I'm done. I'm done, check mark, you know. They continue till the end of their lifetime, till today. They're still fighting for us. So it's never a done deal on this side of the aisle.
Right. I don't know about, you know, being the flavor of the month or this moment. And Genevieve, you've done work based on this time period where a Black identity, a Black idea of what Blackness is has been pushed to the forefront. Everyone's collecting Black art. A lot of Black artists are getting exhibits, and our language is finally being heard. I'm hoping that we have added to the canon that this is something that can be sustainable, that this is not something that just happened for this short period of time and it goes away. We're all smart. We understand that the art world does move on. You know, if you're not thinking that, then you're in big trouble. But I think we can sustain it enough and keep the idea of the works that we're doing right in the dialogue. So if they move over to, you know, works by African artists, you know, in the diaspora, then we can say, we can still, you know, hold up our end in that conversation. So I think it's really important. I think a lot of us worry about that, you know, that the art world will move on. How long will this last? But I think you just have to continue to work, you know, and not worry about that. At least I'm not, sort of. Sort of not worried.
I think it's interesting that the women are kind of asked, you know, how are you going to sustain all of this and how are you going to keep up? And it's like, what are the men doing, specifically the white man doing, to kind of step down and elevate women of color in these spaces and in all walks, is something to consider. It's a team effort. It's not just one-sided, you know, for this to kind of continue.
I also feel like we've been here, Black artists, Black female artists, we've been here and we'll always be here. And the work is forever. So whether the art world is on board or off board, the work has been here, it'll continue to be here. And it's, yeah, regardless.
That's right.
Absolutely. If there aren't any last points, I don't want to take up too much extra time from everybody, and thank the audience again for being here with us throughout. And also just include a reminder that we are going to send out resources that the panel and all of us have been compiling as we've been discussing these. So different books, articles, or other artists to look at right now. So we'll be sharing that in post. And also we're going to look to get, I see a ton of questions that just flooded in, and unfortunately we're out of time, but we'll do our best to get answers to these and also include that in the resources that we'll share following this. So we see your questions and we appreciate them. We just can't get to them live, but we will get them answered to the best of our ability. Thank you all. Thank you. A virtual round of applause again to the panel and to Marie, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you to you all. It's been amazing. We want to keep going, right? But we can't.
Right. I wish we could.
We just warmed up. Well,
yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
It's webinar world. So I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.